If you guys are, Laura, you ready?
Sounds good.
I didn't hear her.
You are
Lori?
ready to go.
We're ready? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. I'm so used to the podcast because it gives me this countdown.
I know it's a little different with Zoom.
Well, I need you. I need this, whatever. Anyway. All right, let's hit the road. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Roundtable with Joey's Legacy. I'm Carrie Hyde. I'm your host. And on your screen, you'll see Scott Fine, who is the founder of Joey's Legacy. Hi, Scott. Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Scott, no? All right. We'll try to figure out if Scott can get something going. Scott, Lori, see if you can handle that in the background, and I'll just move on to Jeremy and Leah, and we'll talk a little bit. But real quick, I just want to let you know that Scott started Joey's Legacy because he lost his beloved dog Joey to veterinary malpractice. And that's how this entire organization got started. So I always say it depends on what side of the coin you look at that, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, because sometimes it's the wrong dog and the wrong family that it happens to. But then again, for the rest of us, it's the right family, because they are fighters and they step up and they make change through their grief. So it's really, really, really important that Scott started this organization. But sad that usually the people that are watching this podcast have been victims of it as well. But what's so great about it is a group of attorneys, animal lovers, and veterinarians. And we're very pleased to announce that we also have a veterinarian student tonight, who I'm going to go ahead and introduce first. So this is Leah Kim. It's her first time on the podcast. Leah, tell us a little bit about, I know that you work with one of our attorneys, which we're going to talk about a little bit, but can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in this?
Sure. So I am a second-year student at Tufts University School of Veterinary Medicine. I found out about Boston Dog Lawyers we have a required course called Law and Veterinary Medicine. One of the professors is colleagues with Jeremy, and he reached out about a job posting, and I applied. I actually looked into JD BDM programs before I applied to vet school, just because I was interested in law for various reasons, which we can get into whenever. But yeah, I have an interest in small animal medicine, so dogs and cats. I'm not sure if I will specialize, but if I do, I'm looking at dermatology or emergency and critical care, so ECC. And I've just been part of Jeremy's veterinary legal counsel for about like a month now, 3 weeks. It hasn't been too long, but it feels like I've been here for a while.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be kind of hard coming in as a veterinarian student to realize that this is also going on, because as a veterinarian student, I would imagine that it feels like everybody just loves animals, and how could anything go wrong if you went all the way through veterinary school? What happens to that along the way has got to be, especially only in your second year. I've worked with animals and was a vet tech for 12 years. And so I've kind of been around a long time. But how sad in a weird way to be that excited about veterinary school and then go, oh my gosh, there's such a thing as veterinary malpractice.
Yeah, I think for some it may be more jarring than others, but I actually worked in New York City for 5 years. I went to undergrad at Columbia University, so I was in undergrad there, and then I worked as a vet tech there in both a general practice and an emergency practice, one in Chelsea, Manhattan, and one in Brooklyn. So we dealt with a lot of potential issues with the veterinary field, just because it's such a high volume, high caseload environment. So with that many patients and that many emergencies, there's obviously things that are bound to potentially go wrong.
Yeah. We're going to get into that and talk a little bit, but none of us would be able to continue on without our attorneys, right? To stand up for our dogs. So I want to introduce you all to Jeremy Cohen, who you probably have seen on the show before, but he's just such a animal lover, and Jeremy, you're so dedicated to changing the course that we're on right now. And I'm just always so pleased when I see your name on the panel, because Jeremy's going to be here and he's going to help us a little bit. So Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you. Always great to be here.
Yeah,
And,
it's trying to get this information out and seeing what's going on. One of the things I always start this with, and I know it can kind of get a little, redundant, and we keep saying it, but the reason why I ask this question, and I know you know it's coming, is because people get confused and they think if something happened, it always has to be someone's fault. And that simply is not always the case, right? It's not always someone's fault when something bad happens. So can you help our listeners understand what veterinary malpractice is?
Sure. And sometimes I do it great. Sometimes I feel like last time I did it, it was a little too convoluted. I tried to make it more interesting, and I blew it. So essentially, and I tend to use the same example because it just works, is that if we have a case where the woman brought her dog to the vet, and because of COVID had to hand the dog off to a vet tech in the parking lot. And when she did that, the vet tech didn't grab the harness correctly, and the dog ran into the highway and was killed. So that involves a veterinary facility. It involves a veterinarian who may oversee that facility, but that's not malpractice. That's straight negligence, that there's a duty, a breach, causation, and harm. The vet tech had a duty to properly take control of the dog. He or she breached that. And by letting go of the harness and not holding it correctly, that caused the harm, which was the death of the dog. Versus malpractice, which is much, much, much more difficult to prove. And the standard is completely different, because here you could do something that would harm or kill a pet as a vet and not be responsible for it, as long as the work you did was within the minimum standard of care. And in the vet world, that just means if you took 10 vets, would 5 of them have done what you did? And so, which means you have a pretty good chance of not being found, of the vet not having committed malpractice, even though bad things happen. I mean, as lawyers, we lose cases, but that doesn't mean we committed malpractice. We just didn't get it done for some reason. So the difference is, one is easy to prove, one is more difficult to prove. That is why Scott has his panel of veterinarians, and as a law firm, I have my panel of veterinarians, and there's some overlap where we get the records reviewed beforehand. If you call us to say the vet did this, well, let's see about that first, and let's see if we can get an independent opinion from a veterinarian who will tell us if the minimum standard of care was met or not. And that's a little frustrating for pet owners, because you're grieving, you're angry, and you want action right away, but you're also turning to the law, and the law does not move quickly. And one thing I wanted to just touch upon tonight was what to do when your veterinarian has found that the doctor or the facility failed to meet the minimum standard of care. What's the next step when Scott's vets and my veterinarians, they notify us that, okay, there's something here. And I can tell you, it is rare that we get that. We're down to probably 1 out of 10 tells us that there was a failure to maintain the minimum standard of care. And these are independent people. It's just that bad things happen, but it's not always the vet's fault. And one thing I want to talk about was how to then contact the lawyer. And Joey's legacy is great. I get contacted by people who've gone through the program, and I get the vet report. But then now they're entering another relationship with a professional, and they were just burned in their mind by a professional. So as a lawyer, how to deal with that, and also as a pet owner, how to manage your lawyer. And as the hour unfolds, happy to share some tips there, but it's pretty difficult. I think if you look at it from the lawyer's perspective for a second, here I am. I just find out that somebody just spent $20,000 on their pet, and the pet didn't live or it didn't work. But one of the very first things people say to me is, I don't have any money to pay you. So suddenly you paid $20,000 to a professional and you got nothing that you wanted. And now I happen to be, because I'm the next professional in line, there's no more money left for me. And as a lawyer, you have to adjust. If you're going to be part of Joey's legacy or part of these vet malpractice cases, you have to adjust that this is not about the money yet. It's not about the money for the pet owners either. It's about accountability. But we're working to make it about the money, and so that you can punish or change behavior through people's wallets. But until we can get pets looked at as more than just a piece of property, no one's going to be satisfied if their mission in this is money. And right now, like with Scott's group, with my clients and my firm, it's really just about accountability. We have to first show that this industry has to be held accountable, and then we can figure out how to hold them accountable. And there's my
see, this is why I love Jeremy, because he makes it so clear that, for one of the things I want to talk about before we're going to get to our questions is 1 in 10, which is something that Scott and I always talk about. And I've worked with so many different veterinarians, and I have seen veterinary malpractice and negligence occur, but it is far more the other that happens. And that's where you get people who hear stuff that there is such a thing as veterinary malpractice, and then they just kind of come full bore and think that everything is veterinary malpractice and negligence, when in fact it's not. And that's a good point you bring up, that we're looking at about 1 in 10. So even though you're gonna send your stuff into Scott and we're gonna look at it, just know that when we tell you that it's not, it doesn't mean it's the end of the road for you, right? You could try other veterinarians and other attorneys, but it's certainly, we have such a great team, and it is an independent. Nobody even knows who your veterinarian is when our veterinarians look at it. We're not trying to, so it's a really good place to be. But I want to make sure we get to these questions because we have quite a few of them. So I'm going to just kind of go down the line. So this one comes from Christina, and she says, hello, I had Dr. Dim, who is one of our doctors who's involved in this, write up his opinion concerning my cat's death a few months back, but I couldn't do anything with it because there are no pet attorneys in this state, New Hampshire. So in this case, a lost cause, or is there anything else I can do?
I will take that. You may very well have contacted me too. I cannot, in the 6 years I've been doing this, there isn't a single lawyer in New Hampshire who's like-minded and reliable. There's a woman there who's a good lawyer, but and I bring this up all the time. She's never once returned my call, and it's such a mistake for her. But there's nobody in New Hampshire, but I can tell you help is on the way, because I am filling out the paperwork so I can get admitted in New Hampshire. There's a huge need in New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, the stakes sometimes are even higher. More cases in New Hampshire tend to be considered criminal than civil. And especially, I've seen vets are sometimes charged criminally, but in New Hampshire, for instance, if your dog bit somebody, that's a criminal offense, and that's a criminal hearing about your dog. So they do take things more serious. I just have to I haven't been able to find a lawyer who'll do it. So we'll have to do it. But right now, you have 3 years to bring a suit. So if you can hang on for another year, might be all set.
Okay. I am trying to, I have some questions coming across, and this one is long, and Kim, Leah, you might be able to help us, but even her mom says, this is going to be long. I'm trying to shorten it. So, and then I was going to try to shorten it a little bit more for you, but I just got this as well. So let me see if I can make sense of this a little bit. So she says that her dog Stripe suffered a spinal cord injury on November 7th, 2021. He could not move his hind legs and had no pain. He was paraplegic. There is no ER here in Buena Vista. No vets returned my calls, so we rushed him to a vet acquaintance who assessed him outside his driveway, said he would be fine, snap out of it, do crate confinement to come back tomorrow for x-rays. As suggested on Monday, November 8th, my dog had x-rays at his clinic. I had to drop him off due to pandemic protocol, went home and got a call. He had compressed discs. Laser treatment would help heal. I agreed, as I wanted to do anything for my dog. Yeah, this is, You know what? I'm going to have, we might, according to neurologist, he had to be wrapped in a comforter. We heartbrokenly agreed to spare him any more suffering and terror due him. This is, Lori, maybe you can condense this a little bit, or, because it is really, really long. This might be something, unfortunately, I'm going to say is probably needs to be sent into Scott and have one of the veterinarians look at it, because there's a lot going on here. And I feel really, really bad because I know this is, people wait to come on here to ask these questions, but I think this is pretty in-depth questions that are going on, even for someone that's been doing this as long as I have. There's a lot that needs to be looked at. So I'm going to hold off on that question. Scott, can you hear us?
I certainly can.
You can. So I'm asking, Lori, I don't know who wrote this. I don't know who is writing it, but for whoever's listening, if you could send that to Scott, maybe he can look at it real quick and shorten it so that he knows how to ask the question to Leah, because it's a lot of coming back and forth and different veterinarians and acquaintances and stuff. So Leah, I don't know if we can answer that tonight. So
I'm familiar with this case, Carrie.
you are?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Can you help us out a little bit?
It's a Colorado case where the victim was neglected by a series of veterinarians when she was trying to get help for her companion animal. And based on the story, it's pretty horrific. The lack of attention and the lack of integrity demonstrated by these vets. I'm working with her, and you can go ahead and you can go ahead and send whatever she sent you, but we're already working on that right now.
Okay. Because there's not a specific question in this that I can see.
Right.
So Lori, if you could send that to Scott real quick and see, it came across from Monica. Monica, if you could condense that a little bit for us, just for the purpose of time for tonight. Otherwise, we're going to have one of the veterinarians look at it a little bit further. So, Leah, I did have a question for you. I know it's early on, but you said you were a vet tech for a long time. I always ask the veterinarians that come on this show as well. Have you ever seen veterinary malpractice or felt uncomfortable, like this isn't the right thing? Why are they having me do this?
I think definitely yes. More so in my emergency setting rather than my general practice setting, just because my emergency setting in Brooklyn, at one point, we're the only hospital in New York taking emergency cases this summer, just because of COVID and the overload. Right. So everything got referred to us. I think the thing is, though, is that I felt comfortable enough / it bothered me enough to ask and or speak up about it. And I think that is important, just because it's easy to quickly make a judgment. I've been there when I've had my pet in the emergency room and where I get annoyed that things are happening, or where I think I know things, what's best for my pet, just because I have some type of veterinary background. But I think the important thing is, one, asking / clarifying why they're doing it. And if the answer is sufficient and or makes sense, then I would obviously back off. And luckily, most of the times which I've asked, there's been some complex biological process that I haven't learned yet, that they have a reasoning for why they're doing certain things.
Yeah, I think that's important to remember, is a lot of times what, even down to putting a muzzle on a dog, sometimes people think it's cruel, and they think you're, doing something to harm the animal when you're putting the muzzle on. And in fact, sometimes putting a muzzle on a dog actually settles them down. It calms them down. So you're right. A lot of times it falls on just ask why they're doing it. Yeah. Ask why they're doing it. Jeremy, while we're getting some more questions, when we talk about standard of care, is there a difference of standard of care in an emergency situation versus general practice, like during regular practice? Does that make sense? Like,
oh, it does.
In an emergency, and she's got a line out the door, and there's tons of emergencies going on, kind of like a triage situation, would they be held to a lower standard?
Well, so I'm not going to say you stumped me, but but I'm going to deflect the question with this, through this answer, and then maybe Leah knows the answer to that, but there's a different standard of care based on where you live and where the doctors operate. And maybe that's obvious now, but the second part of, did they fail to maintain the minimum standard of care for the region where they're practicing? So the standard of care is different in Boston than it is in Rapid City, South Dakota. And because in theory, the Rapid City or a country vet might not have access to all the diagnostic machines that they have in Boston, all the information, all the best candidates for a job, those things. So that there's a scale that certainly adjusts by region. Whether it's about an emergent situation or not, my answer would be, if I'm not defending the vet, I would say, no, they're held to the same standard of care, whether it's emergency or not. But maybe Leah knows a deeper answer than that.
It's interesting because I asked that question based on the region, because I knew that about the region and what that veterinarian would even have access to. But it makes me think, gosh, I mean, you have to think, and these animals aren't speaking to us. So we have a split second sometimes to make these decisions in an emergency situation versus having a history on this dog and knowing so much more if they're your vet. But Leah, do you have something? What do you think about that?
I think, no, the answer, I think they should have the same standard of care. I think the difference is the main difference between emergency and BP, I think, in terms of my experiences, is just, there's no time for like fluff with client communication. Not like, hi, how are you? I'm Dr. Blah. Like, I've worked here. I'll be helping with Cody today, etc. It's like, your dog is unstable. I'm going to stabilize it. We're going to do this. Are you okay with that? If not, here are other options. I don't think that the standard of care is different. I just think that it's a more blunt and less fluffy client communication where you're, taking the time to like introduce yourself, create this client relationship, just because one, there's no time. If you're bringing your pet to the emergency room, it's probably not stable. And two, like, hopefully it's not going to be a repeat client.
Right.
So client relationship is not less important, but you just put it on the back burner if the dog or cat is, has 30 minutes to become stable, or it does.
Yeah.
I can tell you that up here, the most cases we get are for the emergency hospitals, and in part because they see more people, but also it's the last stop. And so, and I think people's expectations are higher for the emergency hospitals. But we got a call last week about a golden retriever that was really struggling with seizures, and the pet owner, his vet didn't have a spot or wasn't specialized, and he was trying to bring his dog around. He called 4 different emergency hospitals, and they all said no, not to bring him. And there's nobody to sue there. There's no compulsion that you have to work on any pets that are not already in the facility. But my advice to him was, and to any pet owner, I think, is don't call first. Just show up. You got to let them see the emergency, because then how are they really going to say no, we're too busy, when you let them see the emergency? So I just felt, it wasn't his fault, but he should have just shown up.
You just got to show up. I tell my clients that, unfortunately, but with COVID, what's happening is, at least in my area, the emergency rooms are being used for non-emergency cases where people are just lining up there because the regular vets are so overloaded. And so the line to get in at an emergency is 5-6 hours. And, so I guess as an animal lover, I would reach out to people who are using the emergency room for non-emergency cases to stop it, because I'm just being that blunt, because this is what's happening is we've got these cases that these animals are dying because they can't get into the emergency room. And it's horrible. And no vet wants an animal to die because they can't see them. But when someone walks in, I know, Leah, I know we've both experienced this. They walk in and they think it's an emergency. They absolutely think their animal is dying because he threw up once 2 days ago, And I'm not making light of it, but that does happen. And so we have to kind of educate our pet parents on what constitute. And I know Dr. Judy Morgan is working on something to help people understand what an emergency is and what an emergency isn't, because it really is confusing to people. They just panic because the dog can't talk or the cat can't talk. And so veterinarians end up, and that's where I'm going to defend vets, is because I've been there where there's a line out the door. And so it can be really tough. So, so right now, I know we also talk about this, Jeremy, too, is that, and Scott, you can help us out on this. How many states, I don't think any states are recognizing our pets as anything other than property right now, currently, right, Scott?
Oregon in 2016, their Supreme Court determined that animals are sentient creatures. They tried a case with a horse named Justice, who was, and this, I believe the Animal Defense League was involved in this. They were able to make Justice the plaintiff, suing the former caretaker for neglect and abuse. And but after the initial decision by the Supreme Court, it somehow went into the appellate process. I'm not sure of the order of events, but right now they're still disputing whether or not Justice is a sentient creature or just simply property. But that Supreme Court did make that decision in 2016. Other than that, I'm not aware of any other successful attempts to deem animals as sentient creatures. We do have a case in Tennessee where they are challenging the $5,000 cap for emotional damages, and they are also challenging the pets or property nonsense. I have other words, but we'll leave it at nonsense. And they're trying to also get a ruling that animals are sentient creatures. So it's a very slow grind, but I think, in a few years, you're going to have more and more states recognizing the sentience of animals.
Was it Great Britain somewhere that said that octopus were...
Yeah, I that kind of blew my mind. What's next? Roaches, spiders,
Anything.
you're going to bypass companion animals, the lives of their companion animal parents, and just, kind of just disregard them and consider them property. And you're giving a higher value to crustaceans and other ocean dwelling creatures. That doesn't work for me.
Yeah, so I think it was Great Britain. They classified octopus and one other thing as sentient. I don't even know if I pronounced that right. Sentient, whatever, creatures. So, but we're still fighting over here in the U.S. just to get our dogs and cats.
Right, exactly.
To be seen is more than, we always say the toaster is how we kind of reference it, is that they're more than the toaster.
Right.
Jeremy, I know you said that there's been some good things, some changes, some things that have been happening is it with respect to us getting the laws changed, getting judges to listen? Can you tell us a little bit about what's been going on with you?
Yeah. So my belief is that a veterinary malpractice case is not going to be the one that changes the law. That's not going to be a case that's going to be appealed. And I don't see that. It will happen, but I think it's happening on the criminal side. So if you want to know how your legislature is going to be in a decade, I think if you look at the criminal laws that protect animals now, they're much stronger than they were a decade ago. So we know that people in the state house in each state are looking out for the well-being of an animal more than they're looking out for the well-being of a toaster or a table. For instance, the consequences of neglect and abuse are getting higher and higher. In Massachusetts, it's a felony. There's no lesser crime if you neglect your dog. I think I may have spoken. I had a client whose dog was too fat. I had a client whose dog was too matted, and in each case, they took the dogs away and they charged them with felonies. the point is that's extreme, but the criminal law is recognizing the importance of animals. If you look in Massachusetts, it talks about you can't, you have to look out as an owner for the emotional well-being of your dog under certain circumstances when you leave your dog outside. So the words are in the laws already. Emotional well-being, that's an acknowledgement that the pet is more than a table. So now it's getting civil judges to recognize that language is already here. And by the way, Deborah will do this all night with her, with all of her references. We have a meeting tomorrow morning, and she's going to be sending me references all night. If you see Deborah Hamilton sending in all this information.
Awesome. She's doing her research.
Yeah. Oh, she doesn't stop, and she knows the stuff by heart. And with us, we're seeing it on the custody cases, which was, I was mentioning, where now, a few years ago, judges would never consider an emergency order to return a dog to a part owner. But now they are, because we're arguing it's irreparable harm. Every day you don't have your dog, you can't get that, or cat, you can't get that pet back. You can't, it has a finite life. So judges are starting to recognize that, yeah, that is irreparable harm, and we need to act. We can't wait 2 years for the trial to come. We have to do something now. And that has the snowball effect. And we just keep bearing the judges with these decisions of their colleagues, and with how the criminal law looks at pets. So it just, the pressure can't stop. But the likelihood that it comes from the legislature and not judges, it takes a lot of courage. And I don't see state legislators right now showing enough courage. So we need judges to do it.
Yeah, that's, well, we need the lawyers to present these, and it's getting there. I mean, just like you're saying now, if I understand this right, if you have a custody case, which I have actually had people bring me legal documents to my work and say so-and-so is not allowed to pick up. That's recent. That's like in the last 3 years, I've been seeing more and more people tell me that their ex-husband or their ex-wife, they have court documents that say that this is now, sadly, it says this is their property. But you're saying that if you hold an animal from somebody, that the emotional distress that that person would feel is something to go after? Right.
Is significant enough that you can try to get a judge to order the immediate return of the pet. And that bond, not having access to that bond and that relationship even for a day, means that the person's suffering. We're also trying to say that the pet is suffering too, but we're just trying to get someone to recognize that not having your pet for even one day is emotional suffering.
Yeah, especially if you have an animal who is, I have these dogs that come and board with me who have separation anxiety that is just horrific, and we have to do all sorts of stuff to try to help calm them down. So can you imagine if the parent, it feels like that pet is in a place he shouldn't be? Now you have not only one anxiety, but the other one having anxiety. So these are all pushing us closer and closer to what we need, right?
Right. And I can tell you, in many states, and it's a secret, but in many, it's just not well known, is in Massachusetts, we have it. If your dog is a service dog and another dog bites it or kills it, or a person harms it or kills it, you are entitled to damages that a regular pet owner isn't. We're getting $40,000 and $50,000 for people because they need a new service animal. So the law is recognizing we're getting there, recognizing the value and the importance. So now, I haven't seen if a vet is responsible for harming a service animal, would the statute still apply, and the vet is responsible, or their insurer is responsible, but that case will come. And so there is a recognition. It's just, there's just not one full sentence acknowledging it across the board yet.
Which is why we can't give up, because if we keep just rolling over, I mean, the momentum's there, is what you're saying.
Yeah, right.
We just, now is not the time to back out.
And it's up to people like Scott, like you started the show. It's a bad thing, but in a way it's a good thing. We're using it as a good thing for what happened to Joey, because these are the things that spread the word, and we need people to get supportive of it.
Yeah. And it sounds like, I don't know too much about Deborah, but it sounds like people like Deborah who are saying, I don't care how much money, I don't care if I ever see a dime, we're going to change this somehow, right?
Well, if Deborah hasn't been on the show yet as a lawyer, she's okay. She's outstanding.
Yeah, with Scott, she has, right?
Yeah, she's on one of the Veterinary
Okay.
Tales episodes.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah, she's been with Scott on Veterinary Tales, but I haven't had her on at all. So, Leah, how do you, like, from someone who's just been kind of put in this, and well, I shouldn't say you have just been put in it. You chose to get on board with Jeremy, which is amazing. But you're so early on in your how are you feeling about it? Do you think that this is something you're going to continue doing, or?
Yeah, I mean, when I interviewed initially with Boston Dog Lawyers, I talked about how I am better at the humanities than I am the sciences, which is not common for someone going into a very high STEM field. But I, went into veterinary medicine because I love it, but I'm naturally much better at things like English and writing and languages. I think it's been such a great experience to be able to merge the two. Like, I love reading veterinary reports. I love reading random statutes that I would normally never have any reason to read had I not joined this law firm. Just because, with, vet school, it's so concentrated. It's not like we're taking writing classes. The most non-science class you take is honestly probably law and veterinary medicine. We have a communications class where we learn like client communication, but it's not the time to learn English creative writing. I think
Sorry, are they have you, I know you're second year, but has the school, you're going to which school again?
I go to Tufts.
Yeah. So have they taught you anything about veterinary malpractice, how to avoid it? Like, are you learning about this?
Yeah, I mean, we're learning about that in our law and veterinary medicine class, and kind of how to handle it. And we also learn about it in terms of, we have this communications class where we basically have actors, like paid actors, come in and pretend to be like difficult clients and or clients that have issues with what you did.
I want that job.
So
I'll take that job.
Yeah, so it's actually really great though, because I mean, I both fortunately and unfortunately have dealt with a lot of clients that are more needy than the norm, just because of the nature of my old practice that was in Chelsea. It was a high profile practice. We just had it was a very high volume, many cases a day, just well known, lots of locations, etc. So, there I learned client communication quite quickly, is kind of sink or swim. But in terms of my class, I think it's a great experience because for people who haven't had a client who's unhappy with what you did, wants to know questions about what was done, it can be quite jarring. So I think it was a great experience to have that class. I think in terms of like learning about malpractice in school, we just learn about that in terms of with communications, how to avoid that and how to better communicate like why you do what you do, empathizing with the client, because a lot of the times the client's just unhappy with the outcome and just needs one, an answer, and two, more clarity / closure. And, Jeremy asked me today, like, what would be advice you give to pet owners? And one would be, one, to be patient, and two, to ask questions, just because you're allowed to know everything that's going on with your pet. They should never withhold any type of information. You are willingly giving your pet to an institution that is dedicated to helping your pet, and there shouldn't be any gray area in between. It should be black and white. It should be transparent regardless of whether it's good or bad. Right. Which, that's the tough part, telling a client, okay, your pet has stage 3 kidney disease and has 2 weeks to live, and you have to either decide to do this very invasive surgery that may or may not work, or euthanize. Like, those are the tough conversations that make, I feel like, veterinary medicine difficult for people that have such high levels of empathy, because it's not like, I mean, I guess I can't speak for everyone, but I personally have seen so many sad cases, like abuse cases ranging from everything, just a bad situation that turned even worse, not to the fault of anyone, but just the nature of the disease. And it's not like it gets easier anytime. Having those conversations with people is difficult and draining. And I feel like sometimes, vets don't want to be as transparent from they skip from A to F instead of going A, B, C, D, E, F. And I feel like that is what causes confusion and also a lot of distrust, because it's like, there's not the relationship is not maintained throughout the whole process.
I would agree with you, just from what I've seen, is there's not, I think exactly right. You get these very compassionate people that, and it comes from both sides. Like sometimes I always tell people, clients especially, when you're talking to your veterinarian, don't start off by accusing, what did you do to my dog? What happened? Because then the veterinarian shuts down, and then it feels like they're trying to hide something from you, but instead they're nervous because they're being accused of something. And just a quick example, just today, this happened. That's why I'm saying it. I had a woman call and say that she was very upset that my groomer didn't cut the dog's nails. Mm-hmm. And that she's upset because she has to come back, and she's really angry. And, so she comes back. When we get the dog in our shop, what it ended up being is that the nails were so short, we could never go any shorter. There's no way. But the dog was chewing the feet. So she assumed it was because the dog's nails were long and he was trying to bite his nails. Yeah. But that's what leads to a lot of, I think, confusion with people. Is it starts off with blame. And when we blame someone, you're going to shut them down, and they're not going to want to give you the information that you need. And so I think you bring up a very valid point, which is why I asked you what we're learning in veterinary school about veterinary practice. How do we avoid it? Because that's really ultimately what we all want. We don't want veterinary practice to exist, not necessarily to teach our veterinary students and our new veterinarians how to like hide it and cover it up. Yeah. We're trying to stop it. So do they talk to you guys at all about, because I think a lot of veterinary malpractice and negligence happens because we don't have enough staff. We're not training them enough. There's things where do they talk about that in vet school, about making sure you have the right staff and you're able to say no?
Yeah, no. So we do actually talk about it. We talk about the nature of the vet field just being understaffed all the time.
All the time.
I mean, that is such a common topic, I feel like. I mean, we have a lot of like elective classes that are like diversity and professionalism in the veterinary field. And that's also where we kind of talk a little bit, one, about diversity in the field, but also about like, we talk about Not One More Vet, the like anti-suicide organization for veterinarians. But that we talk about the field being understaffed and to be wary of taking certain jobs. For instance, like large animal ambulatory careers are notoriously difficult. You are one vet driving a truck full of medical supplies from farm to farm. It is a very different lifestyle than clients coming to you in an office. There is a shortage of emergency veterinarians because no one wants to be an emergency vet due to the fact that there's such a high volume of patients, and it's not, the chances of malpractice occurring is higher. If you have like 8 patients in front of you and you're fresh out of vet school, the chances of you being able to handle that are not necessarily great. Hence why they're urging things like internships so that you have, a year of practice where you can be guided by a senior vet who has been a vet for a long time, where you can make mistakes, not mistakes in the sense of malpractice, but rather like, okay, do I treat with this or this? Help me, senior vet. We never talk about hiding malpractice. We talk about preventing it. We don't talk much about if malpractice were to ever occur, though, unfortunately. Other than our law and veterinary medicine class, where we briefly talk about it, we don't really talk about next steps after that.
That's unfortunate, because I think that's a lot of what vet schools, at least I see, because other than my son's in medical school right now, human medical school, and they have to learn so much more before they could ever go into private practice. But a veterinarian could graduate vet school and start private practice tomorrow. Yeah. And they're expected to do so much at that point, know how to run a business, know how to manage people, know how to, so we have these problems. And Jeremy, I honestly believe that if we can change the laws and make animals more valuable in the eyes of the law, then our vet schools will have to follow that and teach more, because there's more at risk there. And so it just kind of all comes together into this nice little package that if the veterinarian schools would teach better practices and knowing about how much staff should you have. Like, I don't think vets even have any idea. If I'm going to take 40 dogs today, and 10 of them are going to be emergencies, and some of them are going to be regular, and I'm going to have to do 8 surgeries, how much staff do I need for that? Like, do they have any idea, or are they just guessing? 3 sounds good, and then on a particular day, one of those people call in sick, right? And you and I both know, because we've been in these industries, and that wouldn't happen in human medicine, right? It wouldn't. They know exactly how many people they need to take care of their patients, and who's taking care of them, and how to chart and what to do. And so I think that's one of our big reasons why veterinary malpractice continues to happen. I have said, and Scott and I have said forever, we don't think there's a single vet out there who doesn't care. They just aren't informed enough to change the way that they're running their practices. And then they try to cover it up. And then you get someone like Jeremy who sees that they're trying to cover it up. And that right there is the big problem, right, Jeremy? The cover up.
Yeah, it's the cover up. And when we're in depositions with veterinarians, one of my most fun questions to ask is, are you incentivized to perform surgery? Do you get bonuses based off the amount of revenue you generate? And they hesitate, but that's, and if you ever talk to Michael Dim about this, he'll tell you it's all about how much revenue are you generating. You will get a year-end bonus, especially for the VCA hospitals run by Mars Candy. It's a business based on profit now, and so you talk about the pressures of just having to see these animals because there's so many emergencies, and then the pressure of you're being told from above, possibly you've got to see them because we're not having a good week, or we gotta hit our numbers. And that's just, it's a recipe for disaster for pet owners because we don't have enough power yet to force that industry to behave better.
Yeah, it is definitely. I've had a good veterinarian friend of mine who quit a practice because it was definitely how much did she sell? How much revenue did she bring in? She was selling stuff she didn't even believe in selling, didn't want to sell. And she was getting called in the office by the office manager who wasn't even a vet tech, let alone a veterinarian, who knew nothing about what was going on and was telling her that she wasn't selling enough product. And so she ended up quitting. So that's definitely we see it a lot in some of the big corporate places, which right now in the United States, we have like these corporates taking over all the small mom and pop places. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem that they've come into the veterinary world.
I want, if we can, I want to spend 2 minutes on a case that Leah and I have worked on, because
yes, please.
The thing is, the vets out there don't even know the work that Scott is doing, the work that I'm doing. When we get the records reviewed, they have no idea the pain, the wasted pain that we're preventing for them. And because there isn't as much malpractice as people believe there exists. And we got a case where the pet owner called and on the intake said, my dog was killed by the vet because dog went in for torn ACL surgery. And during the x-rays, they surmised must have manipulated the other leg for some reason. Well, the dog was under anesthesia and the pet owner believes and tore the other ACL on the good leg. They're not really sure what happened, but dog went in with needing left leg surgery, came out needing right leg surgery. And it was a really big, sizable dog. And so that's the call we got. Vet killed the dog because of what they were doing during x-rays. But then we dug deeper and we got the records. And before we send them off to a vet, we make sure we have everything. Leah reviewed them. And what the owner said, what it turned out was they had said when they got home, they got the dog out of the car and it was in so much pain, and they were older and they couldn't move the dog into the house, that it was in the driveway all through the night, midnight to 4 a.m. And they called the hospital and they were ready to said, bring her in and we'll do another surgery. So the dog's alive, but in pain. And then they went on to tell me how they had another dog like this a few years ago, and they built a ramp, and the ramp was expensive and it was heavy and it didn't work. So now it turns out they called a vet, a mobile vet, who came over to euthanize the dog. And this all happens in like a 12-hour period. And so then and I'll turn it over to Leah here. As you're reading the records, you realize the vet didn't kill any. The vet, here's a case where the vet probably committed malpractice or did something possibly with the dog, but that where you have to cause the harm, it wasn't the vet's fault that they put this dog down. It turns out it was the owner's choice, because they had said we really didn't want to have to deal with our dog after surgery on both legs, and how will we do that? But this was spotted luckily before we went forward. And why don't you jump in a little bit to show how you realize that?
Yeah. So basically, judging from, I have some knowledge about CCL/ACL surgeries just because I shadowed a specialty surgeon, and they did a bunch, and there's all these statistics that with large breed dogs, if you tear one, you can tear the other quite quickly afterwards. That's super common. When I was reading the record, whenever I read records like this, I feel like I go in quite objectively, because I want to give the client an answer, regardless of whether it's malpractice or not. It's not like I'm leaning one way or another because I'm a vet student, because I've been in that position where, my dog's been in the ER for 6 hours and he has a lot of medical issues. So I get really worried about him, where I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I want to know what's happening. Like, you've had him for 6 hours. He can't breathe. Like, what's going on? So when I read these records, I try not to be biased. But when I read the record for this case, yeah, we basically found out that, at first everything was lining up with what the client said. One leg was torn, the other suddenly became torn post x-ray. I was like, oh, that's weird. Maybe it tore during x-ray, that would be bad. But then they failed to admit that they had left the dog in the car for like 4 hours and the dog was in pain. And they said that, he was screaming in pain. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't urinate or defecate. And so that signaled them to put him down. But had they talked to the vet or talked to anyone saying like, okay, we can give him a sedative to make him calm down, we can give him an appetite stimulant, there's so many other things to alleviate that pain before you jump to euthanasia, that, once I read that they had elected to do that, it was kind of obvious at that point, just because, dogs presenting in pain can be very scary. They are, like you said, they can't talk, so they express their emotions very differently. They're vocalizing, they're immobile, sometimes they're vomiting because they're so stressed. Sometimes they're urinating themselves because they're so stressed.
Sometimes they become vicious. They can bite.
Yeah.
And it can be scary to see.
Oh, definitely. They can definitely be behaviorally worse when they're in pain. That's super common as well. I understand why it's alarming to pet owners, having not seen an animal in that much pain, to not recognize it as being fixable. But had they not jumped from, going from let's get an x-ray to let's euthanize, it was just a sad case. The dog was young, could have had surgery. There were other options too. Like, I just thought it was a sad case that the owners didn't take accountability for much and wanted someone to blame, when in reality they elected to euthanize, and that was just what happened.
But that case was presented to you guys just as the vet killed their dog?
Yeah.
And see, if we don't screen those out, then these cases are not going to be given the seriousness that we seek. And that's why sifting through them and only presenting the ones that you can clearly prove liability, you have to have that credibility. If you're starting to create a new field of law, then you better have the credibility when you bring it.
It's one of the reasons why I have brought on, I asked one of my friends who's a veterinarian, and I said, listen, you got to get involved in this organization, because Scott and I have said it, there is a small number of bad actors, Scott calls them, and bad veterinarians who are engaging in veterinary malpractice. And when it happens, they don't change their policies. They don't hire more people. They don't do anything. They continue to do it over and over and over and over again. And in doing so, the good ones are constantly being accused of things that they didn't do. And so we need more and more really good veterinarians and people like Leah, who I can already tell is going to be a fabulous veterinarian. And I'm excited to have you join the veterinary world, because, you know, we need vets to speak up and so that we can weed out the bad actors and get in, because it's stressful. Vets are quitting left and right. The suicide rates we heard are going up in veterinary. They're being blamed, and they're very compassionate people. So it's really hard to have that tough skin and also be a very compassionate person and work with animals. So Scott, Jeremy, I think you're absolutely right. You guys are doing such a good service for veterinarians. And that's where people miss this. They think we're just out to attack veterinarians. And this is such an amazing thing for them. And I'm glad, Leah, that you recognized that when you came on board, that, hey, they aren't coming after vets. It's not that. We're trying to change the system and make it work. I know we're up on our hour and it's late for you guys, but we always talk about what can be done and how we prevent veterinary malpractice, and pet parents play the biggest role in that. I've said that from the get-go. You play the biggest role in that, from choosing who to go to and asking the questions. But one of the things that Deborah brings up, and she says that Jeremy taught her, was to get a second opinion. And I want to direct this question to you, Leah, because I know it can be very, people can come to you and say, well, I'm going to get a second opinion. And people don't want to say they're going to get a second opinion because they feel like they don't. But are you guys being taught that you should encourage that from your clients, to get second and third opinions?
Yeah, we actually are. One of the things that they encourage us to do is that veterinary medicine is a very collaborative field. So a lot of the times they teach us, if you don't know something, refer them to someone else, or tell them to, refer them to a colleague that's better, well known in that specific field. There are always vets that are, this vet is really good at skin stuff. This vet is really good at Yorkie stuff. There's so many vets that have, regardless of whether or not they're literally specialized, but they may have just their own skill sets that are unique to them, as every individual does. So we're always taught, don't make stuff up or take a case because you feel obligated to. Always refer it out, because what's the harm in doing that? If they end up choosing you in the end, then that's their choice. If they want to go to you, even if you say, like, I don't have much experience in this, but my colleague does, or XYZ does, or I know of this hospital that's done this surgery historically before. That's something that they always emphasize to us, just that it's a collaborative field, and that it's okay to say, like, I don't know how to do this, or like, I haven't done this surgery in 6 years. Like,
yeah, because it hasn't been my experience that veterinarians are willing to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I think, God, so much could be in their own interest to say, I don't know, and somebody else know. But I see it all the time. I had a case come in one time with a dog just for grooming, and we noticed his lymph nodes were swollen, and I suggested they go to their vet and have it checked. And the vet poo-pooed it because I'm just a stupid groomer and I don't know anything. Well, of course, it turned out to be lymphoma, but it went 6 more months before it got diagnosed, because he didn't want the groomer to know what it was, although I never said what I thought it was, although I thought it was that. But it hasn't been my experience. And I think that pet owners feel that, like, this crazy competition with veterinarians. I don't want them to go to the vet hospital down the way. And I think that is because, also, think about it, for the people who are listening, a vet in human world, right? We have surgeons, we have anesthesiologists, we have dentists, we have all these different things. But the vet has to be the anesthesiologist, the surgeon, the GI, and sure, we have some specialists, but people think that your local vet can do all of that. Mm-hmm. And so I think vets need to get to that point where they take that expectation off of themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's a newer thing as well. I noticed with older generation vets that have gone to vet school, in like the 90s or the 80s, it's maybe back then it was even more of a shortage of vets where you don't encourage like second opinions and collaboration. But I feel like now we're moving towards a different shift in mentality where
I hope
it's
so.
actually quite fine that you don't know the specific thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope so. I think that'll make a huge difference. But Deborah had pointed out, Jeremy, how important it is to get that second, I will say even as far as the third opinion. And if your vet is against that, then I wouldn't even go to that vet anyway. Like right off the bat, that would not be the vet I want to go to.
Yeah.
So we're up on our hour. What are we going to do, Jeremy? What's our next step?
To continue in veterinary schools to have classes about law, but also in law schools to have classes about animals and pets, because a lot of law schools do not have those types of classes right now. My own law school doesn't, but here we are. The vet schools at least are making an effort, and the more we can get vets to understand they don't have to be afraid of lawyers, and lawyers to understand that less than 1 out of 10 vets actually have committed malpractice, it'll be much easier to resolve things. So overlap among the professions, it's working right here.
Yeah.
It's a start.
Leah, what is your final thing you would give pet parents to try to help avoid this?
I would say do research. I recently actually had an issue with a hospital with my dog during a spay, and I assumed that they did dental x-rays whenever they do anything with the mouth, because all the hospitals I've worked at are like AHA accredited, and doing dental x-rays anytime you do anything with the mouth are quite standard. This hospital didn't do that with my dog, and she went under for anesthesia and lost a tooth like a week later, like one of her molars, and she was like bleeding, and I was like, why is she losing this tooth? She was just under a week ago for deciduous tooth removal. Like, why would what did they miss this? And I found out that they didn't do x-rays. But that, as much as I was annoyed that they didn't do that, because I felt that was such a common standard of care to be met, that was my fault for not doing research. That that's not standard procedure for them to do these dental x-rays. And so I left it at that, and that was just a lesson learned that I should probably do more research on who I bring my dog to.
Well, you do, and we've talked about it before. Dental is probably one of the biggest things that Scott gets emails from, is the dental care, and a lot of times people like knowing whether is your vet tech a registered vet tech, or who's watching the anesthesia machine, like what's happening. Like you need to ask these questions, because they matter. They absolutely matter. So, and sometimes it's not just that they lose a tooth, but they lose their life, and you don't want to find out later. So I agree with you. Doing the research is so very important.
Yeah, it sounds so necessary.
It is. And by doing your research, I don't think any of us mean go on Yelp and find out who likes them and doesn't like them.
Yeah.
You really have to go in there and ask questions and find out what the standard of care is, and if they are meeting those standards. That's what we mean by doing our research, right?
Definitely.
So, yeah. Scott, what's going on? We know we need to get the documentary made. We talk about this all the time. What else is going on?
Well, I want to make a couple of points here real quick. Number one of the ways Joey's legacy is making an impact currently around the country is that I am starting to receive victims who say to me, I was victimized by a bad actor. And let me interject, bad actor is not a veterinarian that commits malpractice. A bad actor is a veterinarian who commits malpractice and engages in deception and duplicity and flat out lies to the human victim about what happened. That is a bad actor, okay? And nobody in this group has come to me and said, I lost my dog during a surgery, the spay went bad and I lost my dog. The veterinarian came out. You could see the remorse, the sadness in his or her eyes. You could tell how badly he or she felt. They offered to pay for the cremation, everything. They did everything they were supposed to do. But guess what, Scott? I'm suing them anyway. I have not had one of those. Every case that has come to me involves deception. And if every veterinarian that was involved in all of these cases that have come to us had not lied and tried to deceive the victim, Joey's legacy would be a non-entity. We wouldn't be, I'd have maybe, I don't know, 5-10 cases a year or whatever, instead of having 10 to 15 a month. Actually, maybe more than that. So it's all we're interested in is accountability, honesty, and integrity. That's what Joey's legacy is all about. Okay. So to kind of piggyback on what I started to say, so far I've had 3 victims come to me and say, hey, guess what? I was referred to you by my new veterinarian who, when I told him about the story of my previous vet, who I believe committed malpractice, my new vet said, hey, there's this place called Joey's Legacy that can help you. Go contact them. So here you've got the good vets, the ethical vets, throwing the bad actor or the bad actors, those vets under the bus. They're tired of it too. But before Joey's Legacy, there's never been a forum to try to deal with this stuff. So we're starting to see more vets recommend Joey's Legacy to victims. Okay, so there's one legal question I want to ask Jeremy. Embedded in one of these comments from one of the group members that we didn't get to tonight is when the victim asked the vet facility, what's the name of the nurse that was responsible for what I believe caused the death of my dog? They said, we can't tell you, it's a private matter. But isn't that information discoverable in a lawsuit?
It's in 2 places. When you request your records and when they're supposed to give you your records upon demand without any redacting, it should be in there. Okay. And there's nothing private there. As soon as you file a lawsuit, all that information is going to come out. That is a misstatement of the law, just to try to deceive.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And the only other thing I want to say tonight, and I think Carrie will agree, you guys, this has been one of the most educational, one of the best podcasts we've had. So I have to thank you personally. It was wonderful. And this goes to my conversation with Jeremy just before we went on the air about Joey's Legacy and what we do. This is the education that we want people to have. I want someone in the group to have listened to Leah or to you and said, okay, I'll remember that for the future. That's the education we want to present to the public. Thank you, guys. Wonderful podcast.
Thank you. Well, you make it happen, Scott.
Yeah.
Well, you guys keep it going. Thank you.
Yeah. I agree. Absolutely agree. The more that we keep talking, the more education, and the people that are listening don't just take it for themselves. They spread it, reminding their friends to get second and third opinions, and it just keeps spreading further and further. And it, I can't say it enough, you guys. Thank you so much for taking your time. This is so late. I work on Sundays, and so you guys are in Boston. So what is it? Like 9,
It's
10,
bedtime
11?
is what it is.
Oh, geez. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, thank you guys all. To our listeners, I always just thank you so much for continuing to come on here and listen and spread this. Remember that the documentary is key to us getting more valuable information out there to a greater number of people to help the change. So I always am a big advocate for telling you to please sign up for Amazon Smile, because especially now during the holidays, we're shopping a lot. That's a lot of money that goes into helping us get the documentary made. You can donate. We have all of that information there. Talk about it. Share this information as much as you can. It makes a huge difference. And that's it, I think. So you guys, thank you again so much.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you.
Great job.
Good night,
everybody.
Absolutely. Wonderful evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.